Started recording. Hello there. How are you?
Good to see you.
Good to see you too. So today we have Dr. Ahmad Al-Jallad, and I'll let you introduce yourself, and then we'll pick it up from there.
Okay, thanks. It's great to be with you.
Thank you.
So Ahmad Al-Jallad. So I'm a professor at the Ohio State University, where I am busy with really the linguistic history of Arabic and adjacent languages. So dealing with also very closely related Semitic languages and languages that Arabic has been in contact with in the past, like Aramaic, for example, and languages Arabic developed into over time. So that in itself is not very remarkable. A lot of people are interested in the history of Arabic, but the approach that I've decided to take is to base the writing of Arabic's history on documentary sources. That is, sources that we can be sure of in terms of authenticity and chronology. So utilizing things like epigraphy and archaeology, studying things like papyri, right? To help us talk about the development of Arabic in an evidence-based way.
Yes.
And so that is the big project that I'm working on right now, from the earliest attestations of Arabic until really how it's thought of in modern times. So that is the basic story. You could put a link to my academia.edu page where people listening in it who are interested can find things to download. Just now, actually, just today, my most recent book was released. It's called the Damascus Psalm Fragments, Middle Arabic and the Legacy of Old Hijazi.
Oh yeah, I saw that. I think I just saw that. So tell us more about that.
Well, it's sort of an interesting book because it deals with the period in history that in the popular imagination, people think, in the popular imagination, it is a period that is relatively well known from historical sources. It is in the full light of history, you could say. And so and that period is the century or so before the rise of Islam, the emergence of Islam, the Arab conquest, and ending about a century and a half after, to 2 centuries after the rise of Islam. And I look at the Arabic language in this period, and most people, I would say most approaches to this in the past have depended upon sources that actually come quite late, either in terms of their origin or transmission. So in the usual way of talking about this period in the past is to consult things like the works of the Arabic grammarians, people like Sibawayh, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And they record a lot of linguistic variation. They record a lot about Arabic, and the material they record ends up forming the corpus, the pool, out of that describes what is allowable for Arabic, and ultimately gives rise to what I've been calling since a few hours ago, kitabis, which is the language you learn in elementary school, right? The Fusha, but the Fusha, the standard Arabic of our books, right? And so we learn that, and that doesn't come directly from what these grammarians have gathered, but it emerges from that. Now we tend to if you open up, for example, an encyclopedia article on Old Arabic, and Old Arabic here meaning pre-Islamic Arabic. Okay. Most of the references in the older encyclopedia articles go back to the work that people like Sibawayh have done, right? But then you can ask yourself, is Sibawayh pre-Islamic? Of course not, right? Of course he's not Islamic. So how is it that Sibawayh and his cohort give us information about pre-Islamic Arabic when they themselves are not pre-Islamic, and they're documenting Arabic from their time period, and in addition to that, they are documenting a very specific kind of Arabic, right? They're not going to everyone who speaks a language that we would call Arabic and asking them for information about their dialect. They're not looking at written sources. They are speaking to من ترتضى عربيته.
من ترتضى عربيته.
Yes. So they have in their mind already an idea of what Arabic should be, at least minimally speaking. Yeah. And when you meet that criteria, you get to be you get to become a resource, a marja. You can go and ask this person their opinion about Arabic, and that's fine. But when we take away all of the judgment and the prescriptiveness of linguistic history, what we are left with is a very small slice of linguistic history that the grammarians give us. They tell us that tribesmen belonging to these tribes or from this region will say a certain thing, right? But for example, we have very little information how the farmer, how a farmer from northern Jordan would have spoken in the 7th century or the 8th century, for example. So that's one thing. The second thing that we have is the pre-Islamic poems, like the mu'allaqat, correct?
Yep.
And this is, of course, in a very these are pre-Islamic. I do believe that in large part, we can't say every single line, but in large part, the basic content, the core content of this material is pre-Islamic. But it is transmitted. And transmission comes with editing. That is, there's no controversy to that. And you could just look at all the different recensions there are for the poems, right? There's no single mu'allaqa of Antara, for example. There are many different recensions, right? So they do differ within that in that way. But in addition to that, they reflect a very different register. They are in an artistic register, a register of performance, right? They don't necessarily, or we shouldn't assume that they are identical to the speech of everyday people. And they also represent a specific cultural production that not the totality of Arabic speakers would have participated in. So in a way, when we start from this point of view, we get a very narrow definition of Arabic linguistically and culturally, and it is almost alienating in some way to many Arabic speakers today, because the vast majority of Arabic speakers don't speak a language that looks anything like this material. And they come from cultures that are quite remote from the kind of culture that's being described in some of this early literature, right? But then that was all that we had. This was what was thought. This is what we had to see into Arabic's past. There is another approach, I thought, and this is the approach that I've, in general, have been advocating, and in this particular book, I'm focusing on for the time period that I've just mentioned. And it's to look at documents that exist outside or exist free from the prescriptive specter of, from the prescriptive norms of, how do we say, Fusha, from the grammarian's Arabic, right? From the way you're supposed to write, right? I saw a video the other day where, someone writes in the vernacular. It was a modern Lebanese joke, I think, but somebody's writing in the vernacular saying, "Iktub bil-Arabi, yani qawaid," right? So we want to avoid that. We want to find texts that don't come from an atmosphere, from an environment where there's someone saying "Iktub bil-qawaid," right? So where do we look? How do we find these? Where do we find these texts? There's one. So the book studies one so far unique and fascinating document. It is a translation of Psalm 77 from Koine Greek, from the Hebrew Bible, Koine Greek, into Arabic. But the translator did not use the Arabic script when he was doing this. The translator decided to use the Greek script to write Arabic. Okay? Now that in itself is very interesting.
Just a joke on the side. If this guy was writing today, it would have become a political kind of polemic there,
Well, and it's interesting because we might consider that there was that choosing to write in Greek like this might have been a matter of identity, might have had a political dimension
as well.
Right? It might have, but we don't need to assume that. We don't need to. That's not our only interpretation.
Of course.
So and we'll discuss that. But it's true. And today, in fact, it's also it's funny because if you do it today in a certain context, it has a political force. If you do it on your text message, if you do it on Facebook, it has no political meaning whatsoever.
Exactly.
Right. So it's completely the environment. But think about this. Imagine if, and so this is sort of what we're dealing with. Imagine if you're in the year 3000 and you want to know how people in the year 2020 or whatever year it is speak 2000. I think we could probably start at 2010 or so. But anyway, speak Arabic.
Yeah.
And all you had were newspapers. You would have the completely wrong idea. And let's say you didn't just have newspapers. You had the cartoons, like you said,
Space Tune,
and the, what do you call them? The Mexican soap opera.
Yes.
We would have the completely wrong idea of how people spoke day to day.
Yeah.
Have the idea that everyone from the Atlantic to to Oman were speaking basically the same language.
Fusha.
And it was all basic and basically saying that would be our idea of Arabic if we relied on that kind of source and if we use textbooks and so on, right? So that's how to think of when we look back to the early Islamic period and we only read the grammarians, and we only look at documents that have been preserved and edited, like the poetry. Even the poetry gives you a lot of exceptions, but you can see other literary works as well. But we get that very narrow view. Now, if we really wanted to know about how people spoke Arabic today from the year 3000, we wouldn't want to look at newspapers. We wouldn't want to look at, we wouldn't want to look at newspapers. We wouldn't want to look at the translations of Mexican soap operas. We would want to look at people's text messages, and we would want to look at people's Facebook conversations when they're using, especially when they're using the Roman or English alphabet.
Yeah,
that will give you the best idea best idea about what people were actually speaking in their day-to-day life, right?
Yeah, come to think, yeah. So this, I mean, if this person was writing in Greek script, then there might have not been because absolutely everyone nowadays everyone, the majority of people write in Latin script. I mean, WhatsApp is much easier. It's just because faster.
Precisely. Yeah. Precisely. Yeah. And you know, it depends. Sometimes you don't even have the Arabic keyboard on your phone. So the idea here might be a scribe who was a speaker of Arabic. Okay, here's a speaker of Arabic. But perhaps, now there are two interpretations, perhaps this scribe is not trained in writing Arabic, because remember, writing a language is much more than simply picking up a pen and producing the letters. Maybe the scribe, maybe he could read it, but he wasn't trained in the way to write in a nice calligraphic style Arabic, but he was in Greek.
Yeah.
Right? So that might have motivated him to use this Greek method, right? It certainly isn't his invention. If you read the book, you'll see that this was too systematic, too established. It seems that there was a community doing this.
Oh, okay.
But there was a minority community deciding to do it this way, right? So, but anyway, this scribe, when he produces this translation, he produces the translation in a language that is basically a sort of translation register of the vernacular. So the way he speaks, but he's also making sure to follow, it's a very literal translation. So it follows the word order of the Greek. It translates the Greek literally. So it sounds weird when you read the sentences in Arabic, because the scribe is using this translation to teach someone or to help someone read the Greek. So it matches the Greek sentence order, right?
Yeah.
But the words, the grammatical constructions, the phonology, the pronunciation, it's all Arabic, right? So if you share the screen with me now, I can.
Yeah, this is fascinating.
I can show you the document.
Advanced all participants. Here you go.
You got it? All right.
Yep.
Hold on, I need my glasses for this. Okay.
Is it, and this would be a question for later about the grammatical structure or the structure of sentences in Arabic. So I'll ask you about this later.
Yes. Yes.
Maybe
absolutely.
it evolved the structure, the order of the words, etc. But yeah.
Precisely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So you see the screen, right?
Yeah. Yes, I do.
Yes. So this here is a photograph of the document. The original document has disappeared. It was discovered in the early 20th century in Qubbat al-Khazneh. This is sort of a ganiza, sort of a depository for unused books that was in the Umayyad Mosque of Damascus.
Nice. Yeah.
And so this was there amongst many other texts. It's a polyglot depository. You had Armenian, you had Greek, you had Aramaic texts, you had Arabic, everything you could imagine. And there were texts that were Christian as well as Muslim. And so the Germans were examining this, and the Germans got the permission from the Ottoman Sublime Porte, the Ottoman state, to study the Christian documents, the non-Muslim documents, I should say, the non-Muslim documents. This was one of them. And when you just look at this text immediately, okay, this text is on the cover of the book, and it's mirrored on purpose because the mirroring is meant to tell you that it's not normal Greek. So it's you look at this and it looks just like a Greek text, right?
Yeah, it does.
Greek, there's not. What you would basically say though is that there's no Arabic here. This is just a Greek text.
Yeah.
Well, that's true for the left side. For the left column, it's Septuagint Greek. It's fine, right? It's the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. But the right text, right column, is in fact, how do you say it? Arabic. So we can see here. I can. Let me go to annotate. Where are we here? Annotate, draw. Yes. Okay. So there are let's read two words here that you'll be able to recognize. Here is one word, right? El-Rab, exactly. El-Rab.
Yeah.
So it's the Arabic word, the Lord, right? El-Rab. And we can see that, well, the Greek alphabet lets us see in detail the phonetic pronunciation of the word. We can see that the definite article is pronounced E instead of A, El. Rab doesn't have a shadda at the end, no gemination, just Rab. But in addition to that, there's something that's missing. This is a very important point because you cannot see this when you write in the Arabic script. There's no i'rab.
Yeah.
You see, there's no i'rab. So if we wrote this in the Arabic script, excuse my handwriting because I'm writing on a screen, and it would look something like this, and it was in a document now this document probably dates 8th or 9th century, late 8th, 9th century CE, AD, right? So this is very early, right? This is within 2 centuries after the conquest.
Yeah.
If you saw a text written like that in the Arabic script from this period, you would immediately say Ar-Rabbu.
True.
Right? Ar-Rabbu, طبعا Ar-Rabbu. Huh?
Yeah.
And it's just, it doesn't have tashkil, but everyone knows it's Ar-Rabbu.
Yeah, of course.
But here you see that, well, there is no U at the end. It's just Al-Rab. And if you see the word before it, it's hard to see the end of it, but you can make it out. It says, this is sigma, eta, epsilon, mu. So sem, and then you have an iota here, and then a gamma. The gamma is used to represent the ayn here. So semi' al-Rabb. So the Lord heard. The Lord heard. Semi' al-Rabb. Not sami'a. There's no
Rabbu.
Right? It's no sami' al-Rabb. Al-Rabbu. It's not that. It's sami' al-Rabb. And that's it. Now you cannot see this when you write in the Arabic script. So in many ways, when we look at these early documents, and this has been the basic methodology, when we look at these early documents, what do? We see a word like, okay, ha. All right, maybe even has dots. Let's put some dots on it. And it's clear that in the context that this is supposed to be the plural of book, the plural of kitab. And when we come across this word in the document from this period in the Arabic script, we immediately say kutubun. Kutubun. Well, I mean, this is, what else would it be? But when we look at documents like this, we might start doubting that impulse and using classical Arabic tashkil to fill in the gaps in these early documents. Because a document like this could say, listen, a text from the 9th century, from the 8th century, it could be kutubun, but it could as easily be kitub. And we would have no idea where it, because we can't, the text itself doesn't tell us anything, that this is what the text tells us. Everything else we've supplied. We've supplied the un. We've supplied the u and u. They're not there.
Okay.
And we've supplied them simply because we've assumed that well, that was just universal. There was no other choice. That's just how it was said. But the document like this shows us that, in fact, there is a lot of variation. And in fact, in this time period, we don't need to assume Arab is being used. And we could very easily have a form like kitub or kutub or who knows what the vowels are, right?
Yeah.
And that right there is I think, a very basic observation, but it's also a revolutionary one. Why is it revolutionary? Because it sort of runs head into this narrative that in the beginning, this is again, we go back to kind of to our what is accepted in public imagination. If we were to say that the mythology of Arabic, it would go like this. In the beginning, there was Fusha. There was the pure Arabic of the poems and of high literature and of public discourse, khitab and so on, right? That was there in the beginning. And then as the non-Arabs began to learn this language, as this language spread, the non-Arabs started to learn it, they lacked the ability somehow to reproduce its grammatical forms correctly. And the language was corrupted. And that corruption, the failure of the conquered people to speak this pure Arabic is what produced the modern vernaculars. And so the modern vernaculars are conceptualized as the product of corruption, of sometimes you might hear people say laziness,
or even ignorance. You don't really know the language.
Of ignorance. So laziness, ignorance, corruption, and ultimately conquest.
Yeah. And
when we look at an early document like this, and we see it even written right here even in a script outside of, not even using the Arabic script. So we can't even imagine that this is an attempt to imitate high Arabic writing. You know what I mean? There's no attempt at imitation here. This is just simply a vernacular. We see that the linguistic features that we have called, that not we, but that this mythology has labeled corruption, fasad, these features are there from the beginning.
Yeah.
They're there at the same time that Fusha is being compiled, as we can say, right? And in fact, when we look at this document, what makes it particularly interesting is that if we push it back even further, we see that these kinds of linguistic features and that this kind of language did not emerge in the Islamic period, but it has its origins in the pre-Islamic period as well. So when we discuss a document like this in light of pre-Islamic Arabic, as we know from not poetry and not from Sibawayh, who was not a witness to the pre-Islamic period, but rather from inscriptions.
Yeah.
We indeed, there are differences. Of course, there's always going to be differences when you factor in the dimension of time. But the the things that we would call fasad, right, like the loss of i'rab, right? The loss of Arab, the absence of Arab, what we would call corruption, it's there before the rise of Islam.
Yeah.
Not only is it there before the rise of Islam, it's there both in city dialects, like the dialect of Petra, which we can see, but it's also there in the dialects of the nomad, of the Bedouin. So we see the absence of this feature all over the place. So the interpretation that things like the loss of Arab are the product of poor second language acquisition by conquered people is demonstrably false. Demonstrably, right? We can prove that that the absence of Arab was there before there were even Arab conquests, right? So we have now almost two, it's sort of, you've got to think in terms of parallel timelines, where you have a timeline for vernacular Arabic, for living Arabic, and then next to that timeline, a completely different one for the language of writing, اللغة الأدبية, لغة الكتابة, كتابيز, and these flow together. And what we have been doing for so long is looking at the latest stages of the vernacular timeline and comparing them to the earlier stages of the written timeline. And these are separate timelines. And that's what produces this narrative. But when we look at the vernacular timeline, what we should be comparing it to is the timeline with the early stages, which are represented by a document like this, right? This lets you see back in time in terms of the vernacular, okay? So maybe we should read it a bit.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
All right,
so many questions.
Good. Well, we'll get to those.
Yeah, take your time, but this is fascinating.
This is the tracing of the document, which is easier to see than the photograph. So we can begin here at the very top. So the word is broken. It says sakhra. Sakhra is just a stone, of course. It's broken, but next to it, fasalat. Fasalat. This is to flow. Fasalat in Fusha. Fasalat here. Fasalat. So we have this imana. Fasalat. And then maya. Maya is the modern word for water, right? Yeah. Of course, it's not in Fusha. But it's here. And not only is it here, it is in pre-Islamic Arabic inscriptions that go back 1,000 years before this document. So maya, and then in pre-Islamic times with a T, mayat even, is there as a dialectal word, not as a living vernacular word for water. And when we look at modern maya today, maya, our point of reference should not be Fusha ma. Say, hey, you know, it's maya now, and look in Fusha, it's mat. Fusha is sort of out of the question because that isn't part of the vernacular timeline.
Yeah, you're comparing just two different kind of spheres and
absolutely
apples to bananas or something. Yeah.
Our vernacular timeline brings us here. We have maya, and then we can go back because we have this documentation. We can go back 1,000 years before this document and find, for example, in the Semitic inscriptions, which are old Arabic inscriptions that date to around the turn of the era, where I do a lot of field research collecting these, and where you have forms like mayat. So, so this is an ancient, of course, the mayat becomes maya, then maye, right? That's the timeline. And ma is just a parallel form that doesn't figure into the vernacular, not into this particular vernacular we're talking about. There are other vernaculars that have reflexes of ma, right? But that's not when we're dealing, let's say, with a Levantine vernacular. That's sort of out of the question.
Yeah. And
so,
just on the side,
yeah.
Okay. How would you, for example, in the case of may, maybe this is why we use may in Lebanon versus mayyit or mayyit. Dead versus water. That's
yes. So well, to begin with, it's important to know that languages don't care if they have one phonemic string, string of phonemes that can mean multiple things.
Okay.
Think about English bear. right? I mean, you can
bear
carry
and bear and
bear witness. I mean, there's so many different meanings of this one word, right? So, and that doesn't bother anyone. And the same, of course. And if you want to think about Fusha, think about what ma means. Ma means no and what, and it's context that tells you what the difference is, right?
Okay. So basically, in this case,
don't have a problem with that. But in general, here it would be, I would say mayyat, and if you mayyat, so the second vowel would be an a, and then mayyit, where the second vowel would be. That would be originally the case, right?
Yeah.
Originally the case. So here we have فسالت مية والأودية فاضت لعل وخبز يقدر يعطي أو يهيي مايدة لشعبه. So it's understandable. The word order is a bit funny, like they put the object first. وخبز يقدر يعطي. This is matching the Greek.
Yeah.
But see this construction here, يقدر يعطي. It's a completely modern construction, right?
Yeah,
and so it's we shouldn't say it's a modern construction. It's an ancient construction that survives in the modern vernacular, right? But when we think of literary Arabic today, and I'm speaking again, I keep coming back to the popular idea here. We think of something like يستطيع أن يعطي. And if you don't say that, then it's not Arabic. Well, of course, Arabic, in Fusha, you could say yaqdir as well. I mean, that's fine too. It's just not part of kitabiz. That is that very narrow kind of Fusha we learned in school.
Yeah.
In any case, we have يقدر يعطي ويهيي مايدي لشعبه. And then we have here لذلك. Now, in the modern vernacular, you wouldn't say لذلك. It depends on where you are. How would you say it in Lebanon, in the vernacular?
منشان هيك.
مشان هيك, عشان هيك, منشان هيك. Now, لذلك, here, we shouldn't think of it as an imitation of kitabiz. Absolutely not. What we can see is that this is a point where the vernacular and kitabiz overlapped. And as time changed, this construction, لذلك, fell out for the new عشان, منشان, and types of constructions, right? لذلك سمع الرب فأمتنع, right? فأمتنع. So and therefore, the Lord heard and became angry. فأمتنع, right? فأمتنع. Now, what's fascinating here is you can see فأمتنع, the initial vowel that's written with the alif, but you're supposed to pronounce it as a vowel, right? In classical Arabic, it would be امتنع.
Yeah.
فامتنع, امتنع. There should be no فأمتنع. Should not be a hamza there, right? You don't find that in classical Arabic, but you do find it in some modern dialects in Jordan today.
Yeah.
Right? This is very interesting. It's not a made-up form. It exists in Jordan. فأمتنع والنار اشتعلت في يعقوب ورجز صعد على إسرائيل. Right? It's pretty clear. It doesn't need a translation, I think.
Nope.
لأنهم لم يؤمنوا بالله ولا توكلوا على خلاصه. لم يؤمنوا. So there's no hamza here. يؤمن, مؤمن. لم يؤمنوا بالله. They still use lam. So they're not using ma yet. Lam ends up disappearing. But in this period of vernacular, lam is living. It's there. It's just, it's a way of negating the past. لم يؤمنوا بالله ولا توكلوا على خلاصه. وأمر السحاب من فوق. Look at that sentence. It's fantastic. You have min fawq, which is a perfectly good Levantine construction. Right? These min tahat min fawq.
Yeah.
Very nice things, and we see them over here already early. And remember, this is a translation of the Bible.
Yeah.
Right? So this is, the person who is writing is writing in a register that's still supposed to have some gravitas, you know. So Amar el-Sihab, and look how he spells Sihab. You see it on line 21. So let me see if I can draw here. Yeah, right.
E-L, yeah.
El-Sihab.
Yeah.
Very imala, right? Very nice. Min fawq wa abwab al-sama fatah. Right, and he opened the gates of heaven. Right. Wa amtar alayhum manna liyakulu. خبز من الملائكة أعطاهم. No, خبز من السماء أعطاهم. I put in the wrong word here. You see, it's broken, but it tells you. We can see how many letters are left, so we can reconstruct them. خبز الملائكة أكل إنسان شبع بعث لهم. Insane, you see it right there.
Yeah, insane.
Even with an
with
acute
yes, of course.
To let you know, insane, right? So it's fascinating because if you look at whenever even today, and this just shows you it's completely parallel. But even today, when there are attempts to write the vernacular in Latin characters, the long A is written like this, isn't it?
Yep. Some do write them if you have it, yeah.
And this writing tradition, completely independently, used the same strategy.
Yeah.
Right? 1,300 years earlier.
Pioneers. So basically, they're not even pioneers. This is how they spoke.
This is how they spoke, and they were making a writing system to represent the way they speak.
Yes.
Right? They were not in any sense trying to, how do you say it, imitate Arabic orthography, the way you write Arabic, right? It wasn't like that. They were trying to, because if they wanted to, they would just write alif with alif, right? They would pick one letter to write the alif, but they don't. You can see here, you have insane written in this way, but here you have a'tahum.
Yeah.
And you see the after the ta, right? A'tahum. And the acute, the accent is there to let you know that it's stressed, it's long. A'tahum, insane. But the vowels are different, even though in Arabic script, they're both going to be represented, of course.
With yeah.
So there isn't.
No, tell me.
No, there is an attempt here to reproduce pronunciation. Yeah.
And now I do have several questions here, but I think the sihab insane, this is just a comment on the side. We can maybe discuss this sometime later. Does this reflect the different tajweed styles, even in Arabic Fusha?
So there is these, in these pronunciations, the imala exist in the corpus of material, the canonical material that from which linguistic generalizations may be made, right? So you can have imala, but if you think about it, and you can find this in reading traditions of the Quran and everything, but coming back to where we began, which was the popular imagination, immediately if you read Fusha with sihab, they say that's not Fusha.
Okay, yeah.
Right? Yeah. It's not, even though it is permissible in certain contexts in Quranic recitation.
This is why maybe it was acquired because the dialect of those who were reading or reciting somehow in time, this is their maybe spoken.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Precisely. No, there is that influence of vernacular.
Yes.
On recitation. Precisely, indeed. And so, we can finish with just these lines here, just to give you an idea.
This is great.
A final bit of the language. So this is when so God saves the children of Israel and He gives them food and everything. But of course, they started worshiping idols again, which angered Him. And here it goes: وَأَبْتَلُوا وَمَرْمَرُوا الْإِلَهِ الْعَالِي وشهاداته لم يحفظوا فأنقلبوا وغدروا مثل آبائهم أنقلبوا مثل القوس العوجة, right? وأسخطوه بأوثانهم وبمنحوتاتهم أغاروه. It's quite, it has a nice, even though he's sticking close to the Greek, there is a style to it. Yep. It has its style. It's literary. It is a stylistic register of the vernacular, a translation register of the vernacular that has its stylistic features, right? And it is elegant in a way. And the reason I read this is because here you get to see that perfect balance where you can see, you wouldn't expect the language, the vernacular from 1200 years ago to be identical to the vernacular today. There is no language in the world like that, where nothing changed for 1200 years. But so you can see here, indeed, there are still many differences. For example, the continued use of lam yahfadhu, right? That's still there. You have only one case ending in this dialect, we can say. The only time there's a case being used, the only time you have i'rab ending is the jar. And only when you have it between pronominal suffixes. So for example, بِأَوْثَانِهُمْ وَبِمَنْحُوتَاتِهُم, right? So it's there, and that's it. And this is what's fascinating here, is the same pattern exists in the Phoenician language, where the Phoenician loses all of his i'rab, okay, except it keeps the jar in front of the suffixes. It's a coincidence, probably. It's an interesting one. So it isn't modern completely, but again, it isn't the Fusha we think about either. It's not Fusha. It's an ancient vernacular, right? And that's what we get to see with a document like this, right? What the ancient vernacular would have looked like.
And this is, so one of the questions would be, well, I mean, languages do develop after all. So these vernaculars, where do they come from? Where do they originate? Not necessarily this one particularly, but I mean, you know, the different Arabic, Semitic, well, Arabic in this case, vernaculars. Yeah.
Well, yes, thank you. That's very good. So we'll come to this where this particular kind of vernacular comes from, but then we have to, as you suggested, we need to look at it a bit more broadly. So where do the Semitic languages come from? Huge question, and completely open to speculation, because the Semitic languages, the original, let's say the way we conceptualize, the way we think about languages and language diversity is sort of similar to how we think about biological diversity.
Yeah.
And so we think of there being an original language which diversifies, right? And the reason we think this is because we can observe it happening. We can look in the historical period and see how a language like Latin, vernacular Latin, diversified over time into French, into Spanish, Romanian, and so on, right? We can look at how, and so an example like that shows us that this is how we can observe languages doing this. So it means at the same time that languages have been doing this even before they were written, even before we could have here, let me just stop sharing the screen.
Yeah.
So I can see you better. How do I do this? No, stop. There we go. Yes. Perfect. Yeah.
Hello again.
So, hi. So it stands to reason that languages have been doing this before even, how do you say it? Before history, prehistory, right? Before there's a written record. Okay. So in that sense, we would say that we see a bunch of languages. We have Arabic, we've got Hebrew, we've got Aramaic, and these languages are incredibly close to each other, right? They are very, very close. And you could deal with languages that are a little bit more further or more distantly related. For example, some of the Ethiopic Semitic languages and Akkadian. But overall, this entire complex of languages that we call Semitic, and we must remember Semitic is a convention. It's a conventional term that we use to refer to these languages. You could call them Southwest Asian languages or whatever you want, right? But it's very clear, no matter what label we use, that the languages about which we're speaking are much more closely related to each other in a way that precludes chance than they are to, for example, ancient Egyptian or Latin.
Yeah.
So when we look at that group, the hypothesis, which is based on, for example, the model of Latin, is that these languages are similar in this way because they descend from a common source. They have a common origin, and that as the speakers of that original language moved apart, migrated, or just for whatever social reasons even stopped interacting with each other as intensively, over the millennia, we're talking about millennia, tiny changes that happen to language, which you can view happening, the difference between your grandmother's speech and the speech of a child, and it's very obvious. Now imagine that on the scale of 3,000 years.
Yeah.
What you get is a different language. And so those tiny changes that accumulate produce different languages over time, right? And so the question, and you can reverse those changes using comparative linguistics, historical linguistic methodology. You can reverse those changes. Now, there are sometimes we can be pretty sure about those reversals, and sometimes they're hypothetical, right? It depends, it's a case-by-case thing. So you can reverse those changes, and when you reverse those changes, what we end up doing is reconstructing an original language, a language that from which all of these others would have descended. Now, that original language, when we speak about all of these Semitic languages, is something we would call Proto-Semitic. And so that proto there simply means reconstructed source language. And then the next word refers to the scope of that reconstruction. Okay, so that seems simple enough. The more difficult part is who and where was this language spoken? Because we can reconstruct grammar and sounds and stuff, but we're still very far away from a community of people who would have spoken it, and where in the world did they speak it?
Yeah.
Right. Where did they speak? How can we
they move around? Yeah.
Yeah, how can we know where they spoke it? So there are two main hypotheses: that either Proto-Semitic was spoken in the Fertile Crescent somewhere, maybe northern Mesopotamia, who knows, or Ethiopia.
Okay.
Now, the general, again, we're in prehistory. We can't know exactly, but there are a lot of reasons to favor the Fertile Crescent solution that have to do with loan words. For example, there is a core vocabulary. There are certain vocabulary similarities that almost all the Semitic languages share, and they share it with other languages like Indo-European languages. Now, that means that the original Semitic language, or some very early stage of Semitic, must have been somehow in contact with something like Indo-European, that they were able to trade these words. And that doesn't seem to be very likely in Ethiopia, much more likely in Anatolia, right? And in the Fertile Crescent. Also, in the Fertile Crescent, that's the only place that's where we have the greatest diversity. And I don't mean number of languages, but I mean types of languages. So there are two main branches of Semitic: East Semitic, which is Akkadian and the languages of cuneiform culture that you have in Mesopotamia, and then West Semitic is everything else. And that diversity occurs in the Fertile Crescents, which would make sense if you had that initial split there, right? You had that initial branching out. If you put it in Ethiopia, I suppose you would have to argue that the split happened in Ethiopia, and then only the East Semitic guys went north. It gets really complicated, right? Or there are many other scenarios that you would have to that you could come up with, but they all require more and more assumptions. But the problem is, when you're dealing with prehistory, we assume that the fewest assumptions needed is the correct explanation. But that's just, who said? Maybe the most complicated scenario is what happened. So we can't know, right? We just can't know.
Yeah.
Turning, I favor northern Mesopotamia, but the northern part of the Fertile Crescent, that area. But I can't prove it, and no one can prove it. It's not falsifiable. So it's just it's a matter of taste, I guess. Now you can come to Arabic.
Okay.
Arabic is a little bit more a little bit easier to approach in this way, because Arabic, there are examples of Arabic in the written record. So Arabic isn't entirely prehistoric. See, if we think about Arabic and the diversity of what we call Arabic, I want you, and the way we all need to think about this, is to put our textbook aside, the book that we have from school, the Alif Ba, or in America they study الكتاب في تعلم اللغة العربية. put it in the drawer. It's great. It's good to read newspapers, but that's not going to factor in right now to our discussion about Arabic. We want to look at the totality of languages that are spoken across the region today, and we want to look at language of the Quran, for example. We can look at the language of the poetries. We can look at the Psalm fragment that I talked about, and we can ask ourselves in a very similar way, thinking about this from a biological perspective, from the biological model in a way. Are there features? Are there linguistic features? Yes, that all of these vernaculars share a common source, the way that we can say that for all the Semitic languages. Now, the document I just read, the Psalm fragment, it's very clearly not Fusha, but it's very clearly Arabic, right?
Yeah.
So there's that very important point, is that it's not Fusha, but it's very clearly Arabic. Now, of course, this complicates things. We can go back even further in time and look at a pre-Islamic record. There are inscriptions that are from our earliest Arabic inscription is, I think we could plausibly date to the Iron Age, okay? Iron Age inscription. Now, we would call it Arabic, but we have no idea what the person who wrote that inscription would have called their language.
Okay.
We have no idea what the person who wrote that inscription would have called their alphabet, would have self-identified as. So when we use Arabic here, it is conventional.
That's the question I have, yeah.
Yeah, it's conventional. What we're basically saying is that the linguistic features of this document agree with later forms or agree with later attestations of a language that we call Arabic and that speakers called Arabic. I mean, the Quranic, the Quranic audience clearly called the language that the Quran was being used, the language of the Quran, Arabic, right? The Quran calls itself Arabic, Arabi. We also need to make that distinction between Arabi and Al-Arabiya, right? Which is important. So anyway, so there is something called Arabi. It has a linguistic profile. It has a linguistic fingerprint. And we can see that the features that characterize Arabic and that mark it off, that separate it from other kinds of Semitic languages, indeed pre-existed the 7th century and go back quite far in time. So there is a bit of, we can use this term in a kind of conventional way to talk about these ancient texts, right? Some people have tried to get around this by calling them Arabian, but it's the same thing, right? I mean, we're saying the same thing. And
in this case, it might be a geographical kind of denomination, or
well, even so, the geographic denomination is based on an ethnonym.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, so you can even call it geographic, but ultimately, the name of this the name of the location of the geographic expanse that we're calling Arabia, that is coming from an ethnonym, not the other way around. It seems.
Yeah. True.
It's unclear. But the point is, with Arabic, we so when we look at all of these and we say, okay, the relationship between all of these vernaculars is best explained as a whole in terms of common descent from a single vernacular, right? Or a single or a group, a cluster of vernaculars. In the same way, we can ask, okay, where was this? Who spoke it? And what have you? Now, the traditional way of thinking about this, the way of thinking about this that, how do you say it? That you might find in your, as far as I know, and I mean, I'm not, I don't have much experience studying this material in a, as a child. Actually, I don't have any experience studying this material, this type of material as a child. But if you open the basic idea is that, well, we're talking again about the origin of Arabic, and we've said that this is how we've defined Arabic. Well, in popular imagination, there are many different stories about where Arabic comes from, and they all are, they all have this kind of mythological grandeur. They are Arabic comes from very, very far away in the deepest deserts, right? That's where you're going to find it, all the way over there. And it's sort of, it's alienating in a way. People speak it, they're speaking the desert language. Well, maybe. Maybe, but you know, that's not a given. We shouldn't just immediately accept that. We should think about it. Or there's classical writers wrote a lot about this, where Arabic came from, but of course their goals were different than ours. They weren't discussing Arabic in the way we were discussing it in any way at all. They're not using a historical linguistic methodology at all. They are, I would characterize these writers more as folklorists, right? They're folklorists.
Folklorists, yeah.
Folklorists, yeah, they're folklorists. And so they are collecting stories about, you know, about prehistory and about a mythological past, right? Not a past that people necessarily, not a past anyone living had any recollection of. And so you have, and there are widely different accounts. There's no consensus among ancient writers. So I don't know how the Yemen, so today the most common idea is Arabic comes from Yemen. But I don't know how that story, well actually, there are studies that explain how that narrative became the favored one, but in the beginning, it was just one of many narratives. There's another narrative that Arabic comes from Mesopotamia, right? And that it was brought to the Hijaz by giants.
Oh.
It's very nice. It's great storytelling, right? And that's the point. We need to be able to appreciate good storytelling, but recognize that it's storytelling, right? So there is no consensus, right? So that the others say that in fact, Arabic came from heaven. It was revelation. The language was revealed to Prophet Hud, right? So, and again, none of these, none of these are, how do you say it? Consider canonical in any sense, you know. None of these stories appeared in the Quran has nothing to say, for example, about where Arabic came from. So it shouldn't really touch anyone's religious sensibilities, right? But the question here now we can examine these claims, and I think it's sort of funny to examine them because they are stories to begin with, right? So when you're already trying to examine a story like this historically, you might be I think it's already misguided. But okay, fine, we can examine this and we can say, okay, well, where did Arabic come from? Well, the prehistoric. You go to prehistory. That's a matter of speculation. We're always stuck with speculation in prehistory. But when we look at the historical record, the very earliest record, so we can go down to Yemen, right, where all of our, where we have the great, and Yemen is the third center, really the third center of civilization in the ancient Near East. I mean, Yemen had a fabulous civilization. It was the center of civilization, certainly in Arabia, and I mean historical Yemen. So it's not the modern political borders. Don't think of that country as simply Yemen, but you know. And you had four principal kingdoms there. The documentation begins as early as the late second millennium BC, right? So more than 1,000 years or 1,000 years before Christ. And what's fascinating now, according to our, now think about this. This is what makes it so fun. According to the folklore, we would expect, well, if we have a text from 1000 BCE from Yemen, in Yemen itself, this must be our Proto-Arabic. This must be the Arabic of the Arabic speakers, right? The purest of the language. Well, the inscriptions were there. Medieval writers were aware of them. And they actually knew the alphabet too. Medieval Arabic writers, historians, Arabic writing, scholars like Al-Hamdani knew the alphabet. These inscriptions are not written in the Arabic script. They're written in an indigenous alphabetic tradition that we call the South Semitic alphabet. And they knew it. They knew the alphabet. They knew it. But we don't have any real attempts that survive. At least we don't know. I mean, of trying to decipher these inscriptions and translate them in medieval times. The inscriptions came to Western scholarly attention in the 19th century and were deciphered, and this is what the result was. Fantastic. Instead of finding the source of Al-Arabiya, of the Fusha, Yemen actually was home to independent Semitic languages that had gone extinct. Okay. That had gone extinct the way Coptic went extinct in Egypt, that had gone extinct the way, other languages from that, other ancient languages have disappeared. They had gone extinct. And it was, of course, there was the language of the kingdom of Saba, Sabaic, right, Sheba. But there were other kingdoms, Ma'in, Qataban, Hadramut. And each one of these kingdoms has its own language. And when you look at the language of Hadramut or Qataban, I mean, these languages are so far from Arabic, grammatically. But to put it in a different way, Aramaic and Hebrew are closer to Arabic than these languages. So
there's no way on earth.
I mean, it
originated in Yemen.
Or you can make the situation more complex and say, well, yes, Arabic did come from there, but it just was never written down. Now, this is what complicates this scenario. So at the same time that Yemen has these very exotic and lovely languages, in fact, they're quite nice, and everyone should read Sabaic, and because it's just a tremendous corpus and lots of fun to read. But at the same time that these languages are being used and written down and so forth in South Arabia, in North Arabia, and in the southern Levant, so in places like Jordan, the northern Hijaz, you have inscriptions. And these inscriptions are very much Arabic. So both languages are sort of appearing at the same time, roughly speaking, but Arabic is in the north, not the south. Now you could say, no, but you see Arabic originated in the south, but only got written when it went north.
Yeah.
I could also say Sabaic originated in the north and only got written when it went south. I mean, it's an argument from no evidence. But if we stick to the evidence, the map is upside down. Okay? The map is upside down, which, well, I would put it another way. This isn't revisionist history. We're not revising history. We are writing history for the first time, because history of this sort needs to be based on examinable evidence, on evidence that you can scrutinize, that you can study and falsify. We can't write history based on folklore. And so when someone might say, hey, you're revising history, it's like, no. What you've done is you've taken folklore and you've assumed it's history without any kind of interrogation of that material. And you're basically saying you need to use your evidence to argue against the folklore, whereas in reality, we begin neutrally. We say, look, we have no history. We have folklore. Folklore is interesting, but we have no history. We have no idea where Arabic comes from. Let's let the documents speak. Let's let the archaeology speak, and let's see. So that's the scenario we have now. Now, I mean, who knows how things can change. But my point is not trying to push forward an argument out of ideological purposes, but rather recognizing that we don't have a history of this language in the ancient times. We just don't. We have a lot of folklore. We have a lot of mythology, which is great, which is wonderful. Everyone should read it and delight in it because it's great to read. It doesn't, the fact that it's not positive its history, that it's not documentary, doesn't make it less valuable. I think it's wonderful that a language like Arabic has the stories that it was spoken by antediluvian giants. I mean, how cool is that?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, or that it's a sacred language of the heavens that comes down and is given to
something similar to Herodotus. I mean,
yes, absolutely, it's wonderful, and it should be read.
And everyone reads it, and everyone just enjoys what he says. Everyone knows that there are so many kind of folklore myth.
Indeed, and that's the sensitivity we need when treating Arabic. Yeah. So for example, I'll tell you something that will amuse you. The studies of modern Arabic dialects or studies of medieval Arabic dialects, when they look at, for example, dialects like Tayyip, right? The dialect of Tayyip, which was a tribe in northern Arabia. Ta'i dialect, Tayyip was a tribe in northern Arabia.
Okay.
important big tribe. That name, the Tayyip, give their name to the generic, as their name becomes a generic term for Arabs in Syriac, for example. Tayyai, right, which just means Arabs. So all of the desert dwelling Arabians are called after this tribe. Huh? Now, the folklore that we have says that this tribe is a Yemeni tribe. Okay, it's a Yemeni tribe that after the collapse of the Great Dam of Marib, now you see this is the Great Dam of Marib collapses and all the tribes disperse, and this tribe, this dispersal, this Arab tribe moves north, but it's originally from Yemen, and that's why they use the relative pronoun dhu instead of alladhi. They use dhu, so it'd say something like ar-rajul dhu.
This one.
Well, they'll use dhu in place of alladhi.
Alladhi, okay.
Right? So I might say something, ar-rajul dhu ra'aytu.
Okay. No, that's
now
okay.
They'll say that's okay, and that's from Yemen. Now, what's fascinating about this, of course, that's good Syriac too. If you just pronounce it.
Yeah, and I'm ignorant in absolutely all languages. Yeah.
Well, you certainly know your Arabic, and I know you know your Lebanese. So
yeah.
But okay, so you take the dhu. But the epigraphic documentation is there, and so we have a history. We have documents that go from Yemen. They go back to 1,000 years before Christ, and there's no Tayyip anywhere there. Whereas we have documents in the north, like the Safavidic inscription, that mention Tayyip hundreds and hundreds of years before the rise of Islam in the north. That's the history, right? That's writing history there. We realize, and we see that this entire narrative, right? The collapse of a dam, the dispersal of all the tribes. I mean, this is a kind of creation myth.
Yeah.
But you think about this Eden, which is ancient Yemen, this Eden that was sustained by a great dam, and then the dam collapses, the waters of creation are released, chaos unfolds, and all of the primordial peoples disperse. It's a beautiful creation myth. It's a creation of a nation, in a sense, right?
Yeah, definitely.
But we're not talking about, that's a different, again, we want to move back to timelines. That's a mythological timeline.
Yeah.
Can't use the collapse of the Marib Dam to explain aspects in Arabic language history, although people do. That what we're dealing with in one way is a literary construction. What we're dealing with is absolutely beautiful storytelling, and in fact, almost in a way, I always thought it robs these peoples of having an imagination, and so that everything they said is, they have no imagination. It's just a depiction of what happened. Right? And so all of these things are just believed because these people didn't have imagination. They just described things, right? They never told stories. And it's a bit silly, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when we deal with the documentary sources that we discover, we turn things around, but then we realize that so much of what we're taught, both maybe in the Middle East, but also in the West, when one decides to study these subjects, is simply the transformation of folklore and storytelling into history because of the lack of there being the idea that there are no other sources, right? Yeah. This myth that there are no other sources. Yeah.
Which is ironic in the West, because this wouldn't happen in any Western languages or Western historical events. So they would rather they would rather look for evidence, if we're saying. But in this case, they just dismiss the fact that there might be evidence, or they might have given up on the fact that there might be evidence to begin with, and they just go with the mythological narrative.
And it's interesting because so much of so when these subjects are studied, I should say that this is not by specialists, of course. I mean, the community of Arabic dialectologists, that is people who study vernacular Arabic, are a fantastic group of scholars, and of course, anyone are quite aware of the difference between the mythological past of Arabic and the
Okay.
Arabic.
Yeah.
But when you deal with people who aren't specialized in this, they're simply narrating. They're simply نقل الروايات. Same idea, transmitting narrations, but in a Western context. Very often, these narrations are presented with the force of as having the force of historical fact.
Yeah.
And so it is funny. So I mean, I don't feel like I have necessarily said anything radical in any of the work that I've done by saying that Arabic seems to originate or come from Northern Arabia, the Southern Levant. I have just simply, I'm actually not very creative in this way. I've simply just told you what the map looks like.
Yeah.
Only reason why it seems it can any way be interpreted as radical is because when you compare that epigraphic map with the folklore, it looks the opposite. But a normal person would say, well, that's not really a problem. Yeah.
Exactly. This is the thing.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, even if you're going against the mythological between brackets narrative, well, there's no problem there. It's just now we found new evidence that says, well, it originates somewhere else. And I do have some questions. I think I will not ask these now because we can talk about them later, but something along the lines of the nature of language, but this is, I don't think it would be as interesting for the podcast now because
there are probably better people to ask about the bigger questions.
No, not that, but I mean, I do know some of the audience is interested in what we're going to be talking about now, which we haven't touched upon yet, but something to think about maybe yourself for later on, because people like Friedrich Schelling, a German philosopher, said something along the lines of language is faded mythology. So it's not in the sense of, creating a myth about the nature of language, but it's just how human beings create this language. So pictographic kind of drawings on caves and then inscriptions on stones, etc. And then how this translates, the images become more metaphorical, and then they become afterwards abstract concepts as the language that we speak now. So this is something on the side. Maybe we can touch upon.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, but for now, and maybe this would be the last section of the discussion. Something along the lines of Arabic in the Levant, but more particularly, near Eastern Mediterranean, like places like Lebanon. Like, what the hell was going on throughout the centuries, epics? What did we speak? The entire debate.
So what are the Lebanese speaking today?
Lebanese.
In that sense, and how and where did it come from? I mean, I think well, that's a very, very nice subject. I think it's there's so many answers to the question, and it just depends on what we mean precisely by the question. So if we look at a place, in the Eastern Mediterranean, we look at, we'll focus on Lebanon because I think that's your audience. So how do we know what people in the past were speaking in Lebanon? Well, the only way that we can know, there are two ways. The only way we can ever know what people in the past were speaking is by what they wrote. But we also know that writing is a technology, and because it's a technology, it is institutionalized in a way, right? Yeah. So what is written doesn't tell the whole story of what is spoken. The same when we looked at these early Arabic documents, and the same when we talked about the grammarians, we get a small snapshot of the linguistic map. So we can only know what people were speaking in Lebanon by what they were writing or what was written about them, right? Let's say other people are writing about them and making mention of words being used there. We can also know a bit from toponyms, from place names, those things. Place names are especially tricky because they can remain intact long after the language disappeared. And in addition to that, they can have sources that that never reflected the local vernacular, but that reflected political episodes in the past that maybe we don't have access to. So, for example, we can think of Al-Iskandariya, right? Yeah. This is not a place name that emerges from the local vernacular. And just imagine, I mean, you know, we have to play this game. Imagine we don't have the historical sources that we do have, and we are faced with trying to explain why there's a city in Egypt called
Alexandria.
Yeah. So, you know, we would come up with some explanation, I'm sure. But the wrong explanation would be that that was the wrong explanation would be seeing Greek as indigenous to Egypt from its earliest history, right? I mean, there's a historical there's a historical story there. So so in Lebanon, that's how we know, and I think we can be relatively sure that people in Lebanon spoke Canaanite languages, right? And Canaanite languages, these are defined. And remember, when we use the term Canaanite, we're using it in this linguistic sense. They are languages that have this fingerprint of grammatical features, grammatical innovations, grammatical isoglosses, right? That is a fingerprint that suggests that the languages spoken in Lebanon, the language in the Iron Age, Bronze Age, the languages spoken throughout the Eastern Mediterranean shared a kind of common ancestor, okay, that had these languages were also in contact, right? So, so if we look at, for example, the kingdoms of Moab, Edom, Ammon, and Jordan, they were writing in what we would call Canaanite languages, right? They were writing these. If we look at Judea, if we look at the kingdom of Israel, they are also using a language that we today call Hebrew, right? They call it Judean, Israelite, whatever. But it is a Canaanite language that we would Hebrew. And Phoenician, the language of Lebanon, was in its consonantal garb. Okay, that's what we always have to remember. In its consonants, probably mutually intelligible with Hebrew. I mean, very, very close to Hebrew. But remember, it's consonants. So many things can be happening that we can't see in the writing system, right? So and not to mention things like inflection and intonation. So it's really unclear how mutually intelligible any of these languages were, but they are very close in the way that they're written, their consonants, right? So these are all Canaanite languages. So it's likely that a large portion, maybe all of Lebanon, spoke a Canaanite language, some form of Phoenician, what we call Phoenician, right? But that's all we can say. There may have been other kinds of languages spoken in Lebanon we have no access to because they were never written, right? You just got to think. You know, you're 2000. How about you're 1200 BC, and you've got these villages up in the mountains. They're not writing anything. And if they are going to write, they're going to write the official. They're going to write the scribal language. They're going to commission a to write a scribe. How can we possibly know what they were speaking? Right? We fill in the gaps. Right? We fill in the gaps. We can't possibly know what they were speaking. The same way, for example, today in Turkey, on the Black Sea, you have pockets of Greek being spoken. Right? Just forgotten dialects. So this is completely possible. So what pockets of Aramaic might be today in places like Syria, in Iron Age or Bronze Age Lebanon, there may have been some pre-existing language that we would never have any access to unless there's a chance discovery. So when we say a certain language was spoken, it does not deny that at the same time other languages were not. Right? It's not a universal thing, right? So there's that, and then at some point in the first millennium, probably, but maybe in the first millennium BCE, but maybe in the first millennium CE even, Aramaic moves in. Aramaic moves in and starts being spoken in all over the Fertile Crescent. But again, we can't know how absolute the spread of Aramaic was. We can know that Aramaic became a literary register, that people in cities and, you know, this kind of spoke Aramaic. But we go back to our guy in the village in the mountains. Maybe he's still speaking the Bronze Age language. We have no clue. But it's fun to imagine that all these linguistic changes are happening, and it isn't until the 15th century AD that this guy finally learned another language. And it's completely possible, right?
Yeah.
This is the funny thing about attestation. So, so then you have that, and then, so that brings us, let's say, to the 7th century, okay? 7th, 8th century, so. At this point, you probably, I mean, what we can say is that the Lebanese are speaking forms of Western Aramaic. Maybe there are remnants of Canaanite. Maybe there's Canaanite influence on this Aramaic. We can't know. The vernacular, right? People are writing at this period, they're writing Syriac. This is the Fusha of Aramaic, Syriac. So we can't use Syriac to know what people were speaking in their daily life any more than you can use Fusha to know what people are speaking in their daily life, right? Syriac is Fusha for Aramaic. So, all right. Then in the 8th century, 7th century, 8th century, Lebanon becomes part of the Umayyad state, and subsequently the Abbasid state, so on and so forth, right? It becomes part of a new global order. You know, you can think of this as sort of globalization 0.5, a new global order. And in this new global order, there is a new international language. It's a language you would use at the marketplace. It's a language you would use for drawing up official documents, ila akhirih. Trade with people, to travel, when you travel to different places and speak with others. And this language was Arabic. But, crucially,
what kind of Arabic that was?
It's not Kitabiz.
Yeah.
It's the Arabic that I just read to you. It's this vernacular form of Arabic. And it's this vernacular form of Arabic that spreads. So this is the living Arabic that comes into Lebanon in this period. And it's at this moment that, let's say, a person living in Beirut who on Sunday would worship and have his liturgy in classical Syria, who would at the same time be speaking a Western Middle Aramaic or early modern Aramaic dialect, and that would be the language of his community, be the language of his community. And then when he goes to the market or when he does his business, he's speaking Arabi, not al-Arabiya, Arabi.
Yeah.
And you would probably, under normal conditions, have a kind of, how do you say it, stable multilingualism or stable bilingualism. Why not? And over time, what happens when you have this kind of bilingualism, especially between two languages that are so closely related? Again, forget. Yeah, exactly. Forget the Fusha. Think about how close Arabi is to Aramaic.
To Aramaic.
To Arabi.
They influence each other. Yeah, of course.
So then they start converging. Yeah.
Speaking of which, they on the tweet that you posted, you reading the Arabic text.
Yeah.
Rachel posted a clip from, I don't know which part in Iraq, where they have this dialect, vernacular that is clearly a mix between Aramaic or Syriac and Fusha and Arabi. يعني, so I did not listen to it.
I didn't see it. I'll check it out.
Yeah.
I'll check
it out.
Maybe
this is kind of the same way for Iraq or something.
Well, I think you're going to get convergence in this way, but convergence now in a vacuum, it would be 50-50 for convergence, but it's not a vacuum.
Of course.
Because people are speaking, now you've got, think about the child is bilingual. The child speaks Aramaic, speaks Arabic, but they're not sociolinguistically equal. Right? And the Arabic is, if you consider now this new international context, the Arabic is favored. There's much more Arabic is international, it's not local, it's a marker of being from the city, so Arabic would have sounded Madani, you see. Being an Arabic speaker meant you were part of the city, whereas speaking Aramaic or whatever local dialect you were speaking, whatever local language you were speaking, would have been like, well, it would have been a marker of a villager, someone from, you know?
Yeah.
So Arabic is associated with commerce, with empire, with business, Arabi even, huh?
And let's emphasize again, the spoken
it's Arabi.
one.
It's Arabi. Yeah, of course. I mean, it's not
the Kitabi one, Fusha.
No, not Kitabis, right? Not Nahawi. So it's but this has its prestige, you know, it comes with. Okay, and so so what happens? As they converge, there's just going to be a lot more material coming from the Arabic side of the spectrum. And in addition to that, you have above all, Kitabis is above everything. And Kitabis is giving words. You think about the legal vocabulary, if you think about religion, law, society, all of this is coming from Kitabis. Administration, vocabulary for administration, economic, all of that all that vocabulary comes from the imperial register. So you have this huge influence of vocabulary from Kitabis. And then you have the local Arabic, which of course has its own kind of city marker, sounds like a city language. And then you have this convergence. So where do you get your Aramaic? Well, a lot of times you just can't see it. You just can't see the Aramaic because it's so close to Arabic. But as everyone knows, there are a few examples that people like to point out. One of them I think is very nice, which is the pronouns innon, like that, which is a beautiful Aramaic pronoun just brought into Arabic, into the local vernacular. You know, you have constructions like shiftul al-walad, or, you know, baytul Ahmad, something like that. Now, that construction is, to me, it seems rather obviously, the source of it is rather obviously Aramaic, but you know, there's some scholars now who say no, it's an Arabic internal thing. But I think when you look at the picture cumulatively, you're sort of pulling strings. You're grasping for straws or whatever you're supposed to say. I think it's quite obvious that it's Aramaic substrate. It's or abstract, right? So over time, this kind of convergence happens, and your final product is a language that is in large part, and in most of the ways that you can measure, Arabi. But the Aramaic components tell a crucial story about the history of that Arabi. And that it wasn't either or, that what you have is, I mean, everything is a hybrid, but what those Aramaic components tell you about is the kind of hybridization that took place here. It wasn't that the Lebanese woke up one day, erased everything from their memories, and started pausing and weeping at campsites. Okay, that never happened. It was a very natural acquisition of an imperial language.
Organic.
Absolutely, and the very nice the Kitabis was that in the past, and is as today as well, very much the realm of the intellectual.
Yeah, and this is I think I just want to point this out. This is really fascinating. I was having this discussion with an Arabic professor a couple of months ago, and the thing is, when it comes to Arabic, so for example, if we're talking maybe Fusha or literary language, they use metaphors and idioms and expressions that I would not even be able to identify with. How they expressed something in terms of a horse, or a name of a horse that particularly comes from one, you know, place.
Yeah.
Like, so this also we incorporate elements into our vernacular as well, whereby we can express ourselves in a way that we understand and that really reflects us, not as an identity. I don't want to talk about, it's not a political identity. It's just that you live on the Mediterranean, you have different kinds of, you know, a different viewpoint, a different perception, a different vantage point of things. You perceive things differently, and this translates into the way you express things. And it helps when it comes to the vernacular. So basically, even when it comes to literary things, I'm not going to be using things that have been used like 200 years ago somewhere in some poetry that I cannot even relate to. Because the point of language is for me to understand it right away without even having to translate it. Or this is what I think. So yeah.
No, I mean, I think that this is a very interesting point you make. I mean, all languages, the point of an idiom, let's say like this, is that it gets fixed and it's not understood literally any longer, or sometimes it's not even the exact meaning of the expression is unclear. It's just the general sense that's communicated. So all languages have these types of things. I remember when I was learning Dutch. Well, maybe no, that's not one. Here's a good one everyone can relate to. Kids today, for example, have no clue why we would say why we would hang up the phone.
Oh, of course.
Right?
Yes.
There's no reference why that is hang up, right? But it's there and it's stuck, and it simply means to close the phone.
Yes.
Right? Right? Or when you record someone, like right now, I might ask you, are you taping this?
Taping this. And then I correct this. I'm like, no, I'm not taping anymore. I'm recording. Yeah.
Precisely. So all language, and I think these idioms are fascinating because they tell you the history of the language.
Of course.
And sometimes independently of the speakers.
Yeah.
Of the cultural, but all languages. So I think the tricky thing is that there is a certain kind of conservatism when it comes to Arabic. That there's this need to keep it frozen exactly as it was, and the fact is you can't do that. It's not. So let's in my view, the kitabis that is used today is in many ways the product of the Nahda, 19th century, and a movement to modernize Arabic, right? And modernizing Arabic, instead of using modern Arabic, they chose to use classical Arabic, sort of, to modernize it. Now, what's fascinating about this is that, do you know the story of Jurassic Park?
Yeah.
Now, you can't bring a dinosaur back to life.
Yeah.
I mean, you can try to revive it and you can substitute some genes here and there, but it's not the exact same thing. It's not the exact same creature. You did not revive a dinosaur. You created something new.
Yeah.
And in a way, that's sort of what's happened with modern Standard Arabic. It is this, and you could say the same with, for example, people still using Latin as a vernacular and stuff. These are not, because the normal mode of linguistic transmission has been interrupted. They are not transmitted from mother and father to child within a community. That is the normal way of language, the way you would transmit a language. But you can transmit languages in other ways, of course, too. But and under natural circumstances, that's what we would call a mother tongue. That's been interrupted, and so you get something completely new, and that's why, for example, I think a lot of people who are even quite good at modern. I have a colleague, a good friend, in fact, who's quite. I mean, I would say he's as close to a native speaker as you can get. But when this person opens up a early Umayyad poetry or pre-Islamic poetry, he has no idea what's going on. He has to read the commentaries, right? Because it is not the same. It's not only not the same language, but it's also not the same cultural context. Everything has changed, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And so in reviving it that way, so this process has led to the creation of something new, right? Something completely new. It's wrong to think of modern Standard Arabic as what always was, right? If only in the most general terms that's the case. But it is something new, and it has to be. It's a living language now, and it's something new. And so now I think there's people are at a crossroads. People who are interested in the subject are at a crossroads because they're saying, well, so we have this new language that right now it's firmly established. It's been used for more than a century. People, I mean, there are really more than 100 million, 200 million. I don't know how many people who are competent in it. But as you point out, one thing that you hear over and over again is that it doesn't feel like it's mine, right? I mean, I can't think in it. I can't express myself in it. I can't. So is that so what do? Do you take the route Germany did with Hochdeutsch and make everyone sort of a speaker of this, this national language that is different than the local vernaculars, but in Germany, I think people speak it natively. I mean, they feel in it, they can write in it, they're emotional with it. Do people do speakers of vernacular Arabic across the Arab world today want to go that route? And it's different for different places. I mean, there's different countries, of course. It's not one thing. They want to go that route with modern standard Arabic, or do they want it to go the route of Maltese, which is just say, look, we're an independent country, we can have our own language and we have our own vernacular, and we can make it into a literary language. We can standardize it. Every country needs to be standardized. You can't have every dialect being written. That won't work for legal purposes. So you need some standardization. Do you go in that way and saying that this is the way to go because this is the language? This is just, well, it's modernization. And for example, one of the things that's quite interesting with the revival of Hebrew is that Hebrew wasn't the oldest stages of Hebrew that were the target for revival. It was the latest stage of the language. Sort of pick up where you left off.
Yeah.
Right? Natural development. So the idea, I suppose, here, in a sense, could be something like, do we then move towards a writing in a language that is just basically more intuitive, that we learn at home and that we speak with, right? It's possible, but then again, there's no correct or incorrect choice here. It is really just
it's all political, kind of. Yeah, it's a choice.
It is ultimately political in some way, and it's also each side has its own advantages and disadvantages. I mean, if you really grow up with Fusha and you learn it well, I mean, you have access to a fantastic library. And even if you can't relate, even if wandering a desert, pondering fate isn't really what you do in your day-to-day life, anyone can appreciate.
Yeah.
There's a beauty to it. So you may not have to live it day to day, but there is a beauty to that kind of imagery.
Of course.
And so, but at the same time, how frustrating is it not to be able to put your thoughts literally down on paper, to put your feelings without translation, literally down, right? So there's that other side of things. And I don't know very much about anything concerning these subjects. These are just natural thoughts about it. But I will say, that at the point, for example, that a group of people decide, a nation or a community decide that the language they speak is, well, that they're going to make it into a literary language and they want to make it official, and there is that is a choice that community can make, and that you can't at that moment, that it isn't for outsiders then to say, no, that's not a language, or no, I mean, it is a choice. And so you'll get this a lot, for example, with Maltese. So speakers of Arabic might say, well, Maltese is just a form of Arabic, which is today it's an independent language. It has an academy. It is recognized. It has its own script, its orthography, its own stylistics. It's an independent literary language, official language. It's Maltese. Historically, Arabic played a huge role, and Arabic is in the way at the center of the development of Maltese, right? It contributes most of its grammar, most of its core vocabulary, but then you don't have Maltese without Sicilian. That's simple. So it, the story is complicated, but that historical story, I think the historical side has nothing to do, or shouldn't play a role in what we call the language today. We call the language what its speakers want it to be called.
Yeah.
So that's, and it is tricky. So there's a Wikipedia Masri.
Of course, yeah, it's very fascinating as well, and written in both Arabic and Latin scripts.
Oh, there's one in Latin script as well?
Yes, I'll send you the link.
Oh, fascinating. I only knew the Arabic one, which I thought was great. I mean, it's wonderful because you can see, I mean, how easy it is to then just write Masri in Arabic, and it just goes, right?
And just on the side, this has nothing to do with the identity, with whatever people identify with, or certain. This is only strictly limited to whether or not people want to write in the language that they speak. That's it.
Yes, precisely. And it doesn't mean, I mean, there is this great fear that when you start writing in the language you speak, all of the heritage will be lost.
Yeah.
Which is, but it's funny because then you can catch the contradictions and you can have a nice discussion about this. So let's say, all right, so you want to write the way you speak. Well, what about the Turath, huh? You're going to lose all the Turath. But then, if you try to read the Turath, they say, you can't understand it. You need to use the Sharh.
Of course. Yeah.
Right. So you already, so
Shakespeare. I mean.
Yes, exactly. So it's not that you actually, we all recognize that just knowing that language by itself isn't enough. Although it helps, I said earlier, it gives you access. It does give you access. Absolutely. But it isn't that you just you don't pick up Risalat al-Ghufran and start reading it the way you pick up Harry Potter. I mean, it's not. Even if you know Fusha, get out of here.
Yeah.
You need to go and you need to make sure you have 10 dictionaries with you. You need to have Sharh. You need to sit there and you need to spend quite a bit of time dealing with it.
Yeah.
And that's nice. That's beautiful. That's
of course.
That's the kind of thing that gets you off. That's a nice thing to do. But it undermines this argument that if you start writing the way you speak, you lose access to this historical material, because at the same time, you could imagine this, and this is what happens in modern Greece. How about we translate the classics? Now, it sounds incredibly strange. How can you do that? How can you translate something like...
in our case, let's say Khalil Gibran, and something that was written in the 1900s.
I mean, you can translate that into vernacular quite easily.
Of course.
And it would, in many ways, it just depends on the audience. Some people will say, no, this feels more like Fusha to me. Some people will say, no, it feels, I want to feel it in a different way. But it's the idea, you don't ever lose anything if you're willing to make the effort to keep it.
Yeah.
See, that's the issue. I think with the current system, the idea that all these people are going out and learning kitabis in school, it doesn't necessarily give them access to what people want to prevent from being lost, right? It isn't that because somebody takes a high school education in Arabic and they learn Nahawi in the classroom, that now the Quran will not be lost. Of course not, right? I mean, that's not no one would tell this person to go open the text like the Quran, start reading and telling us what it means. No, they would always say you have to go to the tafsir. You don't understand it. You don't understand it. So what difference does it make in that sense, right? Or give them poetry, or give them whatever you want, right? So there is that. There is that issue, and I think at the same time, I mean, it's a hard decision. Well, it's not a decision anyone has to make, I guess.
It's just that organically.
Yeah, these things just happen. But it's an interesting one to kind of contemplate and wonder what things would be like. Could one, and I don't know if anyone's actually done this, but it would be a nice experiment. And I don't believe that one needs to write vernacular in the Latin script. You can use the Arabic script, which in itself is just simply a later phase of the cursive Nabatean script, which is itself just kind of a cursive Imperial Aramaic script.
Yeah.
So it's not even, I mean, we call it whatever we like. But the point is, you can use that script if you modify the orthography, you modify the orthography properly, you can use it to represent everything in Arabic.
I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Nasri Khattar project to write the, I think you are, to write the, in a separate, like standardize the alphabets and without connecting them.
Connecting them?
Yeah.
Well, I think, I am. Yeah, I don't think it's necessary. I think you can connect fine, but I know, yeah, there's some people trying to come up with different. The connecting isn't necessarily the problem.
Okay.
Problem is so for example, one thing you can hear all the time is that the vernaculars have 5 vowels. Arabic has 3.
True.
Okay, so create 2 more shapes for the other vowels. I mean, it's not very difficult. These are things, if you wanted to keep the script, you can modify any script to represent any language. The problem is right now, if you're writing, how do you say it? If you're writing in vernacular and you want to represent the A vowel, you have to choose between fath or kasr, right? Or E. So you don't, but then you could easily just come up with a new vowel, or you could take the Syriac vowel, right? The small epsilon and put it there, or whatever you like. The point is, any script can be modified to express the language adequately. So you don't need to necessarily change the script, but you could if you wanted to, right?
Yeah.
But it would be interesting whether you use the same script or whether you use the others. And of course, should add here that a script does not have to, how do you say it, represent the phonetics of a language perfectly, right? Native speakers can get through that quite easily. But with that said, it would be an interesting thing for someone to do. And this would take someone who has a good style in the vernacular and a good way of, because this is a literary style in the vernacular. This would be for someone who composes vernacular poetry, for example, like a Zajali.
Like Hussein Andil. Yes.
Okay, fantastic, right? So good sense of aesthetic with the vernacular.
And Elias, Elias Boisa, I spoke. Yeah, he's also on Twitter, but yes.
So they perform Zajal. They do that. Fantastic! Wow, I'm a huge fan of that form of art. I think it's absolutely brilliant, beautiful. It's truly it's at the same level as any other Arabic poetic tradition, and it should be recognized as such, right? I mean, it's gorgeous. It's the metaphors are incredible, and it is irtijali, the kind of
yes.
I mentioned as well. It makes you really listen in awe. But someone with that kind of sense, right? Can you translate something from Turath into dialect? Something that's widely appreciated as heritage literature. That is, can it be translated into vernacular? Because they are different languages, of course. But and I don't know. I mean, I don't know this, but it would be interesting to know if that has ever been attempted, or if someone should attempt it. Or whether someone would be interested in attempting it, taking something that's so loved and that people really like from what is called Turath literature and translating it into vernacular.
The attempts that he's been what he has been doing now was translating the Little Prince, the Lebanese, but I'm not sure about something from the Turath. I'll
see that would be an interesting experiment, right? Because from
the Fusha, yes,
from Arabiya to Arabi, or going from Fusha to Masri, or something like this, right? Yes. Like seeing how that would work.
Okay.
And because there's so many opportunities for creativity in that kind of environment. So it would be an interesting experiment. I wouldn't know what to translate. In fact, there's so many different choices, so many different things to think about. Depends on what you like. I'm a man from the desert, as you see behind me. So I would say, try translating Labid. Yeah, and so that's the idea. But it's it could be interesting. Translating the Little Prince using the what alphabet?
Both.
Oh, both.
And the book is done. I mean, I don't know when he's publishing it. I can let him email you a copy for you to just look at how it's been. And they're translating Nassim's book as well.
Yes.
The Bed of Procrustes.
Right. That's going to be fascinating too, because that's Nassim's writing is just absolutely beautiful. So, and it's very nice to read. So I think it would be interesting to see going.
But then, as you said, the from Fusha, that would be even more interesting.
it would have more of a maybe it would be symbolic in a kind of way too, right? Because translating from Ajami to Arabi is one thing, but but going from Fusha, right, to Arabi would be quite a different kind of experiment. Well, anyway,
let's see how that goes. But yes, thank you very, very much.
Hey, thank you.
I think we've
always fun to talk to you.
2 hours limit here. I don't know if you have an.
Oh, did we exceed it? We exceeded 2 hours?
Yes.
Oh, geez. Well, I hope it wasn't too boring for you.
I did fascinating stuff. This, I mean, seriously, I just hope that you also enjoyed the discussion.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm really, really thankful that you accepted the invitation, and
well, it was a pleasure, of course. And
yeah, sure, definitely.
All right.
Congratulations on the publication of your book.
I'll give you the link for the book. You can put it in the.
Yes, sure, definitely. Let me just stop recording here.
Yeah.